Psalm number 23, and we continue to look at a marvelous passage. We began a series entitled I Am, an Invitation for Transformation, looking at the various I Am statements in the Gospel of John, and we dealt recently with the I Am the Good Shepherd statement, and it's hard to mention that and not go to Psalm 23, and so we've deviated a little bit from that, but I think what we've come to learn about the Lord and what we've come to learn about Him as our shepherd is truly an amazing thing. We've already seen the ownership of the sheep. The Lord is my shepherd. To be quite honest with you, you don't need to say anything else than that right there when you ponder it. What else do you need? How does it get any better? Who else would you choose? The Lord is my shepherd. And He continues to develop it. But honestly, if He stopped the psalm right there, it would be a psalm that would be rich with meaning and rich with application. That led us into then the provision of the sheep. We saw the idea of contentment. I shall not want. It's not just that you're not going to lack anything. It's that you're not going to have a desire for more. You don't need anything else because you've got Him as your shepherd. We also saw the provision of security. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Sheep will not naturally lie down unless certain things are characteristic. And when a sheep is content and lying down, it's secure. If it doesn't have that sense of security, it will be on its feet and will be very restless. And there's a sense of security that's there when you realize who your shepherd is. And we saw the nourishment both of the green pastures as well as He leadeth me beside the still waters. And then last time we saw the provision of restoration in verse number 3, the first part of it, He restoreth my soul. And we talked about a sheep that was cast, one that would be literally lying flat on its back, unable to get itself up, and some of the causes that would create that. I want to move this morning into another area of provision, and that is direction. Notice the Bible says, He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Some people mistakenly believe that sheep are able to be left alone to fend for themselves. The reality is that is just very simply not the case. I've referenced a book a number of times that has been a great blessing to me entitled A Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. And in that particular book, it was a man who was a shepherd at one point in time. He also was one who managed them on the hillsides as well as one who owned them and managed them as a manager and then had others who would take care of that. And then he was a pastor at one point in time, and so he was able to get it from a lot of different angles. But he brings out a very interesting observation, and this was the observation he made. No other class of livestock requires more careful handling, more detailed direction than do sheep. Once again, I find the analogy to be very fitting when God describes us as sheep. By their very nature, sheep are creatures of habit. They will walk the same path until it creates a rut. These barren spots soon become home to parasites of all types that can cause great harm to the sheep. If the sheep are not constantly moved to new pastures, they will actually destroy the pasture to the point that it will become nothing more than a barren wasteland. They will eat the grass all the way down to its roots and have been known to even paw at the roots and completely uproot everything in that pasture. Their habits are actually very destructive. Knowing that tendency of the sheep, the shepherd must diligently plan ahead. He has to constantly be on the lookout for the next pasture, being certain to not allow the sheep to graze beyond what it is that the land is able to bear. And every day he would have to go out and begin to examine the ground on which they were feeding and try to determine if it was at a point when the sheep needed to be relocated. This didn't just happen on a whim, and this didn't just happen because you decided to get up out of your chair and go check on the sheep for a few minutes. It was a lot of work, it was a lot of planning, and it was a lot of preparation to be able to properly manage. Sheep are not placed in a pasture that would have very little thought. Prior to ever relocating the sheep, the shepherd had already scoped out the next area to be sure that there was nothing in it that was going to end up causing harm to the sheep. Again, I find the parallels to be absolutely amazing. I think it certainly is fair to say that we also are creatures of habit. In fact, let's take it a little step further and to say this: we prefer to often cling to our own habits, even though we know they are destructive. God said very accurately in Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 6, "All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way." It's amazing how many times we often think we know best, but we seldom understand the destructive nature of our own tendencies. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 12, as well as chapter 16 and verse 25, both state the same thing. "There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." I believe this is primarily speaking of one's eternal state, but I'll say this: there are a lot of Christians who don't have any discernment. And they will take a way that appears to be right to them. We'll study in Judges 9 tonight, Lord willing, about Abimelech who usurped the throne essentially in Judges 9. And the people will say, you know what, they chose him because their heart was kind of leaning towards him. And we might just say it this way: they liked him. It's amazing the things that we think are good. And oftentimes those things are very destructive. There are times when we have witnessed firsthand some of the destruction that takes place in other people's lives, yet for whatever reason we still prefer to try to go ahead and cling to this and think that in some way this is going to be a good thing. The reality is for all of us that we really don't like change. Change for many of us makes us feel very uncomfortable. Change forces us to expand into new territory. It moves us out of those destructive habits. Change can be a good thing when God is the one who is directing that change. Let me caution you, if God's not directing that change is a terrible thing. And it will end up destroying your life. Change, when God directs us, takes us to new levels. It forces us to, in many ways, grow in ways that honestly we probably would not otherwise grow in. And as our shepherd, God knows what is best, and God will move us into situations, oftentimes to keep us from ourselves, to keep us from our own destructive habits. It may be against what we want. It may not be that we want to change fields because we really like this grass over here. The hill's not quite as steep in this pasture as it is over there. But God knows if we stay there, it's going to become very destructive to us. And out of compassion, He will force a necessary change. Failure to force that change will inevitably result in destruction. Oftentimes we speak of growing in our Christian life in different terms. Let me use a term today: achieving new ground for God. How do we do this? Because in order for us to achieve this ground, there has to be certain characteristics that are going to define who we are. And if these characteristics are not present in our lives as believers, then we're going to find that we're probably not feeding in very good pastures. We're content to gnaw away at the grass that's half dead. And God's got so much of a better life out there for us. It's amazing how many times in my own life I have been willing to settle for something that is so inferior to what it was that God wanted. because I failed to develop my walk with the Lord as I should. Maybe you're able to attest to the same thing in your life. And in some cases, it maybe even encompass years of your life that you wasted away on the barren lands of sin and shame, as the songwriter says. There's a much better pasture that's there for you. Let me also point out before I get into this, however, that the cost of discipleship is very high. Jesus never taught any differently. All throughout his ministry, he taught that if you're going to follow God, it's going to cost some things. And it's going to cost a lot. It's going to cost your comfort. It's going to cost your security. It's going to cost in times relationships. It's going to be a lot of hard work that's often going to be very unrewarding in its appearance. It's going to be a difficult thing. And those who said, okay, well, Master, what do I do to inherit eternal life? And he would constantly point out the great demands that being a true disciple of Jesus Christ has. And I wonder how much we really apply that in our lives today. We've got a level of Christianity that is very complacent. A level of churches, unfortunately, that's very complacent. And we'll read a chapter to keep a day to keep the devil away and say a quick prayer. And that way, hopefully, it's kind of like the good luck charm. Lord, bless the day. I got a lot to do. Thanks and amen. Oh, and by the way, thank you for saving me. And if that's your Christian walk, you're missing a tremendous amount. And God wants to take you to that new ground. And so there are certain qualities, I believe, that need to be present to achieve this new ground for God. These are not really original with me, I'll say that much. I developed them a little bit differently, but the author in this particular book does point to these. Number one, love. You know, typically we love ourselves most. We love ourselves typically more than anything, and typically more than anybody. One of the joys of marriage is realizing how selfish you really were before you got married. Yeah, it's no longer your space. It's someone else's space. No, let's not say her space, lest I get myself in trouble. Okay, back there, that's right. I said it a long time ago. What's mine is mine, and what's hers is mine. No, it didn't work out so well, but anyway, I tried it, and it's not worked out quite so well. It's amazing how selfish we really are. You know, it's amazing how selfish we can be with the kids. Dad, I just want to be with you. I just want to do nothing. I just want to veg. I want to sit in my chair. It's been a long Sunday. It's been a long weekend. You can love me from a distance. Okay? Tell me you love me, but I'm fine with that. You stay out of my space. You see? Often we find the world revolving around us. It's about me. It's about what I want. It's about what I desire. And the problem is when I don't get that, oh man, now it's a problem. You know what the real issue is? It's love. Can I tell you that before you ever will reach this higher ground, you have to come to the point in your life when you love God above everything else. In fact, the New Testament teaches that your love for God should be to the point that all of your other relationships are as though you hate them. The dearest relationships on earth. Now, Jesus is not advocating that you hate your parent or that you hate your spouse or that you hate your children. That's not the point of it at all. But what is being taught is you should love God to that point that you love Him more than anything else. And see, when you reach that point in your Christian life, what you will find is that all of a sudden, when God chooses to redirect, it's okay. Do you know why it's okay? Because I'll gladly do whatever it is that He wants. Because I love Him most. It's very easy to sing There is a name I love to hear. I love to sing its worth. It really costs us nothing to sing, "Oh, how I love Jesus." To be honest with you, it costs us nothing to sing, "All to Jesus I surrender." We'll do so in a little while. But when you really think about it, do you love Him that much? "Oh, yeah, I love Him." Okay, that's fine. How much time did you spend with Him then yesterday? "Well, I was really busy." Mm-hmm. You love Him, but not quite as much as everything else. When you begin to examine your love for the Lord, I think you'll probably find it's in constant need of growth. And you ought to be loving Him more today than you've ever loved Him before. And you ought to look at all the blessings God's given you and thank Him and see Him in a different light more today than you've ever seen Him before. That ought to describe your relationship with God. And this isn't just some theory out there that's good for preachers or good for whoever. This is what God wants for you. "I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it in deep poverty." Right? No. "I am come that they might have life, and that they might have the greatest misery of all." "I am come that they might have life, and that they might wear their burdens on their faces all day long." How's it going? It's good. God's been really good to me. Really? It's obvious. Tell me more. Tell me what He's done. And when somebody responds that way, it's like, "Oh, I'm not going to ask that again." Okay? Oh, wow. Has God been good to us? Yeah. Man, He's been good to us in ways we don't understand. Ways we'll never comprehend. I had Appalachian State playing at Georgia yesterday, and police escorts are always a challenge, and it's just craziness is all there is to it. And when you pull onto college campuses, it's even more crazy. And when you pull onto college campuses with the opposing team, it is beyond crazy. They have a number of opinions about you, and they are very free to share their opinions. And the officer in front of me, and we had been, is very dangerous, and they are very fast and on all of that. Shortly before, and we were actually on campus, thank the Lord, he blew his rear tire. I have no idea how. I don't know what he hit or anything. And he drove it on in on a flat tire. You know how good God is? I don't even know whether he's saved or has any concept of how good God is. But God took care of him. And there are so many things like that in our lives that I think we can each say, wow, God's been good. In order to reach new ground for God, you're going to have to love Him above everything else. Number 2, there's inevitably going to be a separation. We often fear standing out in the midst of the crowd. We're very concerned with what people think about us. We are consumed, in some cases, with what people think about us. We often want to create some sort of an image that people will like. I'm not taking this on a makeup direction, okay? So if that's where your mind goes, that's not at all where I'm going, all right? But we try to create this image of what we think so-and-so is going to like, or maybe what we think so-and-so is going to appreciate us. And it's going to cause us to maybe be liked by this particular person. We talk about peer pressure to teenagers. Adults do the same thing on a scale infinitely greater. Well, I don't want to really bow my head and thank the Lord for my lunch in front of these guys. These are some rough workers. So, I'll just say thank you, Lord, for the food. I prayed. I didn't really stand out. It'll make a statement when you pause and thank the Lord for your food. But let me tell you what, if you were acting just like Him a few moments before, it's going to make another statement. And that one's not going to be positive. Those who achieve greater ground are going to have to be willing to stand out among all the others. Daniel chapter 3 is a very familiar passage. You don't need to turn to it. Story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, otherwise known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Do you realize there were thousands of Jews who were taken captive? There were only 3 who did not bow. What did the other ones do? It seems as though they bowed. Did those 3 stand out? Yes, they did. What would you have done? Many of us, or many of other Christians, not us, the other Christians, would have not bowed inside. Lord, you know my heart is sincere. I realize that I happen to be on my knees, but Lord, I'm on my knees praying to you, not bowing. What would everyone else be thinking? Well, you're bowing. But Lord, it's not what's on the inside that counts. That's not necessarily an accurate philosophy. I understand that it is important what's on the inside, but that doesn't justify the outside being whatever it can be. And that's what we've unfortunately done a lot in our Christianity today. Would you have taken that kind of a stand? And then you're given the opportunity to do it again. Maybe there was just a misunderstanding. And who's that God that's going to deliver you? Well, you know, King, we're not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God is able to deliver us. And you know what, King? He will ultimately deliver us from your hand, whether it be through death or whether it just be through a miraculous deliverance. God was able, and they were confident of that. I wish I could say, oh yeah, I'd boldly stand. Absolutely, I'd stand. There's been a lot of other times I had an opportunity to take a stand for God, and I didn't do so. If I want to achieve new ground, I'm going to have to be willing to separate myself. Number 3, denial. You know, the essence of true discipleship is exactly that, denial. Jesus stated it in no uncertain terms, if any man will come after me. Doesn't mean if he's going to come after me, and will in that sense. It means if he wills to come after me. If you determine to say, all right, you know what? I'm going to live for God. Okay, here's what you've got to do. Let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. You just say, well, if you determine to follow me, then you're going to first of all have to give up your rights and no longer insist on them. Well, I've got a right to being happy. I've got a right to feel this way. You don't know what I'm feeling. I've got a right to talk to you that way because of how I'm feeling. No. You've got a right to control yourself. You've got a right to prayer because you're a child of God. Those are your rights. What about these selfish rights that I've got? Well, I've got a right to have a good job and a nice home. And I mean, why do I have to deal all? Why is my stuff always breaks? I've got a right to have something that doesn't. It's a life of denial. You know, the disciples were used by God because they truly gave up their own rights and their own wills. And they left some very difficult positions when they went to follow him. And the same is true for us today. Number 4, humility. It's interesting in the world of animals how that animals create their own social status and social order. Chickens, it's the pecking order. You know why? Exactly why. They peck the other one to death if they need to. Okay? They're going to win. In the sheep realm, as I understand it, it's the top ram. All sheep like to be the top ram because he's the one that gets noticed and he's the one that gets the attention. And if the other one is called the tail ender, if he dares eat my grass, And there they go. And they knock him out. And sometimes the one who's a little bit inferior decides he's going to go ahead and fight Top Ram today, only to find out he shouldn't have done that. And he gets beat. Others, they immediately see it and off they go. Can I tell you, God's not looking for people who want to be recognized for their accomplishments? Matthew chapter number 6, you find 3 different examples given that describe our motive. Why is it that you give? Why is it that you pray? And why is it that you fast? If any of these things are done to be seen of men, in each case, the Bible says they have their reward. Literally, they have their reward in full. It is as though they were given a receipt for a transaction. It's done. That's all the reward you get. If you serve the Lord, or if you do things, and maybe you take the infamous praying for your lunch, if you do that to be seen of men, you have your reward. I hope they see how godly I am. Lord, you got your reward. You remember what was said about the Pharisee who stood on the corner of the street and began praying that way? He prayed with whom? Himself. Have a good conversation with yourself, because that's all it really is. Well, I hope my service isn't done for what man thinks and for those kinds of accomplishments. I hope you don't serve God for that. I hope instead you're willing to be humble and, in essence, take that back seat, so to speak. Number 5, acceptance. Oftentimes, I find myself, perhaps you do as well, questioning what God allows in my life. Or I find myself frequently questioning why God doesn't resolve what He has allowed into my life. And sometimes I like to think, okay, well, I'll have a good attitude about this today and He'll resolve it tomorrow. And then God doesn't do that. This sends me into another question. God, why did you not do this? Why did you not resolve this? Paul, why did you not take the thorn out of my flesh? You never saw him saying that, did you? What he learned was that my grace is sufficient for thee in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. What he learned was that actually by this thorn he would be able to experience God's power in ways he would never have been able to. And so he says, all right, great, I'll take it then, Lord, because that is what I want. Lord, I'll take... I don't know, Lord. Really, oh man, Lord, that's going to hurt. That's going to cost a lot. The cost of discipleship is high, but I can tell you the rewards are infinitely higher. But rather than questioning God, we must reach the point where we just simply accept Him. We accept what He allows. And when He says it's time to move to the new pasture, time to move to the new pasture. Do we always understand it? Mm-mm. Will it create other questions? Yeah, most certainly. But I accept it. Number 6, surrender. Similar to denial, but not quite, a little bit differently. Those who wish to achieve this greater ground must reach their point in their own life when they surrender their will to the will of God. Most important thing you'll ever be able to determine in your life is, what does God want me to do? And young people, I hate to tell you this, but that's not a question that you answer one time at the age 16 and never have to answer it again. Okay? What does God want? I knew the Lord was directing me to be a pastor as a young teenager. There was no doubt in that. I didn't know a lot of other stuff. I never saw the whole teaching in a school thing coming around. I hated school. I didn't like school at all. Why would I teach it? I did everything to avoid it. Pursue my master's degree? Psh, I'm never going to pursue my master's degree. That's what Dad did. Yeah, psh, I'm not doing that. All right, fine. You'll lay here in the hospital bed with your appendix taken out and find out you got a mass in your pancreas, and you'll start thinking, oh, okay, Lord, is that what you want? Yeah, I'll do that. So now guess what? Class starts tomorrow. Great. How well is that going to work out? Did I want to do that long time ago? No, when I graduated from school, I was done. No more school for me. I wasn't dumb enough to say that I'm never going to learn anything, but I'm not doing school. I'm not teaching school. I'm not attending school. None of that. Now I'm doing both. Okay? Did I see those things in my life? How many times during the course of the day do you find yourself saying, Lord, what do you want me to do here in this? You see, the person who's gaining new ground with the Lord is constantly praying. And it's nothing for him to say, oh, Lord, I don't know. Lord, how should I handle this? It's natural. If you have to force yourself to that, you're missing it. What about your priorities for the day? Lord, what do you want me to do? I know I've got my priorities laid out. I've got it all scheduled out, and it's going to work out perfectly. And then something else comes along. All right, Lord, that's what you want. That's a challenge. And oftentimes we find ourselves questioning and once again not surrendering. Number 7, obedience. This is the final one. Once I surrender to Him, I have to be willing to do whatever He wants me to do. Well, it's pretty uncertain. Isn't your whole life uncertain? I mean, do you really think if you took something into your hand that now it's certain? You take your own job, let's say that, and you make it happen. You think that's going to be certain? Why, yeah, because I started my own business. Have fun with that. What if people don't want your business? Well, I didn't think about that. I know what you need to do. You need to go own a store. Right, Cecil? Yep, own a store. You can have anything, money. You don't even have to buy anything, right? You get free groceries. It's amazing the things people think and say. That's the worst part. It's bad enough when we think them. It's even worse when we say stupid stuff. But anyway, I mean, you look at this and say, well, God, what is it that you want? All right, Lord, I don't see how this is necessarily going to resolve itself. But I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to take this next step. Because I know that's the direction that you're wanting. And the most important thing has to be that I center my life on accomplishing God's will. That has to be what governs my thinking. The entire psalm is divided into two different sections. The first section is found in verses 1 through 3, and it would pertain more to the sheep who would be at home on the ranch, so to speak. Verses 4 through 6 describe the sheep ultimately going up to the mountaintop. He uses the word table in verse number 5 to describe the tableland, if you understood it that way. That's not where the range is, so to speak. They reach a point when all of a sudden as the snow begins to melt on the mountains, the shepherd will take a slow drive that's going to lead up to the tops of those mountains. Even in Palestine area, this would take place. And that's that area that's referred to in verse number 5 as being that table. Where does that path to higher ground begin? In the valley. Verse number 4, at least let's introduce this. I don't know how far I'm going to take this and where we'll pick it up next time. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Let me just stop it right there. I've entitled this part, The Journey of the Sheep, and letter A, the difficult valley, the first place we've got to go. The valley is a place of great danger. It's very dark. It's very foreboding. I don't like it. Sheep don't like it. I prefer, as you do, well-lit paths, preferably free from all obstacles and danger. Just a nice, easy path. I can see what I'm doing, I can see where I'm going, and I can see a long way down that path. But when I enter into a dark valley, I find I don't like this part nearly as much. It's a place of great danger. It's oftentimes one that is surrounded by steep cliffs. The predators frequently hide in these cliffs. In some places of the valley, the path is very narrow, perhaps with even a cliff on one side going up and a sheer drop on the other side. It's a place geographically that is subject to flash flooding and to severe storms. On many occasions, even the author spoke of storms that would suddenly seem to come from nowhere, including snowstorms in July. Sheep are not thick-skinned animals, and so a flock that gets cold and wet oftentimes will develop pneumonia and various respiratory type infections. Light is really seldom able to enter the valley except for a few hours at the peak of the day. Valleys are dangerous places. For many of us, we would say these are the places that need to be avoided. You know, the shepherd knows better than that. Because the shepherd knows that by going through this particular point, you're going to be able to reach greater heights. But you're going to have to go through this. A valley is a place of great danger, but secondly, it's also a place of great delight. The truth is that the valleys that we enter in the Christian life are what we choose to make of them. We can tend to look at things from a very negative perspective and question everything as to what it is that God is doing. Or we can just simply begin to accept what it is that God is doing. So let me quickly take this point and say the difficulty or the difficult valley and ask this question, why do I have to go there? I mean, why didn't God take a helicopter and just pick me up and set me on top of the mountain? I can avoid the danger, I can still get the blessings of the top, and we both got what we wanted. God doesn't work that way. Why is it that they go through the valley? Number one, it's the best way to the mountaintop. Sheep are obviously incapable of scaling the sides of the mountains. They're not going to just climb straight up a cliff. They have to be led to the top by means of a path that wanders slowly up the side of the mountain. You know, even today, the roads and the paths to the tops of the mountains are often cut out through the valley. That's why you wind up there so much. It just takes its natural direction and its natural course. Let me maybe phrase this a little bit differently. The mountaintop doesn't exist apart from the valley. If you want to achieve greater ground for God, you're going to have to go through some valleys in life. You're going to have to go through some difficult times. But I want you to notice a word that the psalmist chose that's very important. It's the word through. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Valleys are never intended as being dead ends from which a person never escapes. But if you're in the middle of a valley, what does it feel like? A dead end. What do you think Job felt? Dead end? What was God doing? There seemed to be no answers. Valleys are never intended as being dead ends from which a person never escapes. Even if it results in death for the believer, the reality is that death is just the beginning. And it is an amazing beginning. But God's never intended for these paths to be nothing more than dead ends. He has instead designed these paths, the valley, so to speak, to be a greater blessing. I may prefer the ranch at home, but the shepherd says, no, I know there's better ground up there. You're going to have to go through this valley, and you're going to have to trust me in this. And when you get through this, there's going to be greater ground for you. Isn't that what's happened throughout your Christian life? You go through those difficult times and you get to the other side and you begin to see things a lot differently. It's good for you. Number one, it's the best way to the mountaintop. Number two, it's a place of great refreshment. The path to the mountain was often very slow and very grueling. The sheep would be on the move for long periods of time in very hot weather, and they would become extremely thirsty. If the shepherd would attempt to lead them to a place that had no water, he would risk the well-being and the lives of his sheep. But do you know where the water is? It's in those valleys. That's exactly where it comes. And so as the sheep would slowly make their way up to the top of the mountains, they would frequently stop and be refreshed by the streams of fresh water that came down from the melting snow on the tops of the mountains. You know, it's also in those valleys that some of the lushest and greenest grass imaginable would grow. And as the sheep would pass through the valley, they would find many places where they could eat and they could be satisfied. But those places of refreshment were found only in the valleys. I know when we think of valleys, we often speak of them as though they are the lowest periods that we have ever experienced in our life. Can I challenge you that the Christian with a godly perspective of the valley will experience great refreshment? So if I don't like what God's doing with me right now, well then get alone with Him. Spend some time with Him. Because what you may find is that some of the best water and some of the best grass that you've ever been able to have was in some of the darkest times. Paul came to learn that again. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 would be another excellent parallel for this. Understand the value of the valley. Don't see it from a negative perspective. See that, hey, there's something for me here. I want to find it. And I want this to be something that's going to challenge me and something that's going to change my life. I also want to point out before I move on that water flows through areas of the valley that have been carved out by previous water. We oftentimes pray that God would enable us to be a channel of blessing. How is a channel made? Is it not dug? Maybe dug by previous water, but there's no channel that's just on a flat piece of ground, is there? It's got to be dug out. So in order for me to be a channel of blessing, what's that going to suggest? God's going to probably carve out some things in my life to allow that water of blessing to flow freely down to someone else. Is there another way, God? Maybe we won't sing 477 anymore. Okay? I'm not sure I want to be a channel anymore. Okay, I'll tell you what. Let me be on the receiving end of Cecil's being carved out. And then he can be the channel of blessing to me. I'll take that. But if it doesn't go out, it becomes the Dead Sea. I don't want that either. The valley is also, number 3, why go there? The valley is also a place of sweet companionship. The sheep come to know the shepherd in a lot of ways on the ranch at home, but they come to know the shepherd in a lot different way when they're going through the valley. The sheep are constantly under the watchful and loving care of the shepherd. In many ways, the shepherd is never any nearer his sheep than when he's in the valley. Just like God is, the husbandman in the passage in John 15 is never nearer the vine than when he's pruning it. He's closer then than He's ever been. Well, I don't like it. I don't like it when I feel Him snipping things away from my life. Well, thank God He's closer than He's ever been. Same thing is true when you're going through the valley. The sheep oftentimes are there, and because of the nature of the valley, the attention that the shepherd devotes to his sheep is beyond what normally is devoted to him. The relationship becomes one of sweet companionship. It becomes intimate. It becomes a stronger bond. And as the sheep follow the direction of the shepherd, they become increasingly more trusting of His direction and of His compassion. Our relationship with the shepherd should become more intimate. It's interesting how we often question God's presence in these valleys. Times when it seems as though there's no relief. But as we draw closer to Him, we should find that His direction and His compassion is always right. And it strengthens us to walk in our lives for Him. I also want to point out that it's a shadow of death, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that the presence of a shadow requires the presence of light. The absence of light, you have no shadow. You've just got pure darkness. In order for there to be a shadow, then, there has to be light. God will never leave us or forsake us. His presence is the light of the valley in the shadow of death. And the result of this is, when I understand the nature of this valley, I can say with confidence, I will fear no evil. The valley, I didn't put this in the notes, I should have. The valley is a place of danger and it's a place of delight, but it's also a place of confidence. I don't have to fear. I will fear no evil. The sheep have no reason to fear. They're under the leadership and the direction of the shepherd. The shepherd will never lead them to a place that He's not already gone before. So why fear? You as a child of God can boldly say, I will fear no evil. Fear does not need to exist because we are in the hands of the loving shepherd. Let me ask a question. What else could possibly produce a greater sense of confidence and lack of fear than to understand the nature of the one to whom we belong? What else do you need? Well, it's a dark path. I don't know how it's going to work out. Well, what else do you need? Because God's got it all in control. What greater sense of confidence, or what could possibly produce a greater sense of confidence? You to have it in your hands? How well does that work out for you? Joke with my wife and say, don't worry, honey, I got it under control. I'm sure you do. Okay? She cringes when she hears, I got it. Yeah, great. Okay, something else is going to break. Whatever it may be. Let me say this, all security stems from a proper understanding of our shepherd. All insecurity stems from an improper understanding of our shepherd. You don't have to be fearful. I'll fear no evil, for thou art with me. I don't need anything else. Psalm 46, verse 1 describes Him as a very present help in time of trouble. Hebrews chapter 13, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. He's as with you today as He has ever been if you are a child of God. And He will always be with you, even when you can't necessarily see it. As musicians come, I wonder, are you wanting